it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Tom Wong. Dr. Tom Wong is a physicist and computer scientist who investigates quantum algorithms, and he is best known for researching how quantum computers search for information in databases and networks. Tom is a tenure-track assistant professor of physics at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, but he is currently on loan to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy's National Quantum Coordination Office and to the Department of Energy's Office for Advanced Scientific Computing Research. Tom is a busy guy. His keynote will be from his Creighton capacity. Tom is an author of the textbook Introduction to Classical and Quantum Computing, which I have over my bookshelf right over there. The only prerequisite for that textbook is trigonometry, so it's a great starting place. He's also the creator of Qubit Touchdown, which is a board game that teaches single qubit gates with an American football theme. Tom is a former high school teacher, and before graduate school, he was a math teacher at an inner city school. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Tom Wong.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction and for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for being here and for your interest and efforts in quantum education. So I'm going to be giving some tips, some resources, some thoughts on teaching quantum computing, ranging from fast facts that you can just insert into existing curricula, just quick 10-second facts, to full courses on quantum computing. So to start off, though, let's talk about what quantum computing is. So we'll start with a prompt from Dr. Charlie Tahan, who asked, in one paragraph, explain quantum computing in an accurate, accessible, and compelling way. And I responded to this by saying, a quantum computer is a new kind of computer that's based on the laws of quantum physics. It can do certain things faster than normal computers because it follows a different set of rules. So this is our definition of what is a quantum computer. It's a new type of computer, uses a different set of laws, and because of that, it can do certain things faster than normal computers. And you don't have to take my word for it that this is a good definition. Dr. Olivia Lanes, whom we just heard from, also said this is the right answer. So just to start off, this is going to be our definition of quantum computing. And the reason why I like it is because it avoids leading with the technical weeds. I think sometimes in our excitement and interest in the technical aspect of quantum computing, when someone asks us what it is, it's very easy to jump into topics like superposition and other technical ideas. But I think leading with the technical ideas sometimes can muddy the message, which is that it basically computes following a different set of rules. And so it can do certain things that traditional computers cannot. Another way to understand this is using a soccer analogy. And I wrote about this. You can just Google, to find a little article I wrote describing this. But the idea is in soccer, or football, as it's known, in most of the world, you typically cannot use your hands. That's why it's called football in most of the world. And because of that, soccer looks a certain way. But if you were to change the rules and allow all players to use their hands whenever they wanted, then the sport's going to look very different. And in some cases, it's faster just to grab the ball, to catch it, to swat it out of the air, to throw it. But not everything is faster with this rule change. If you want to get the ball across the field as quickly as possible, it's still probably fastest to just kick the ball versus throwing it or running with it. And so this is the idea that if you change the rules, certain things can be faster, but not necessarily all things. And the same is true with quantum computing. We're changing the rules of the game by switching from classical physics to quantum physics. And by doing so, certain things are faster. And so that's my quick introduction to what quantum computing is before we get into how we might teach it in various settings. So in terms of breaking up how we might teach quantum, I have here a timeline of different lengths of time. So I'll begin by talking about ways to insert quantum computing if you just have a quick 10 seconds that you can just say it, as an aside in an existing K-12 course. what you can do if you have a full 10 minutes that you could devote, what you can do if you have a full hour or a full lesson that you can devote to teaching something quantum related, and finally, if you have a whole semester to teach an entire course. So beginning with just, if you have 10 seconds, what are ways to introduce quantum in the classroom? So this is basically when you just have a fast fact where you can mention something about quantum or quantum applications in regular courses. So for example, let's say you're teaching a high school chemistry course, and high school chemistry is probably where most students first learn about quantum mechanics and spin and in orbitals and so forth. And say you're working on these types of electron configuration diagrams. And you have, spin is up and down, and you're inserting them in these little boxes. Well, this would be a great time to just insert a fast fact and say, oh, actually, did you know that the spin of an electron can be used as a quantum bit in quantum computers? So spin up can be your 0 and spin down can be your 1. And then just keep on going with your chemistry lesson. So just a fast fact, you're not trying to teach them all of quantum computing in 10 seconds. The idea is for them to start hearing the words. And this might be the first time they've ever heard the word quantum computing. And from there, it will hopefully either spur interest in the future, or if it comes up again in their further education, it won't be a foreign term. Similarly, in Algebra 2, that's where many students first learn about imaginary and complex numbers. And one of, a common question for students might be, what are these used for? Well, now you can insert, well, actually, complex numbers are used in quantum computing. And you can continue on. Again, you're not explaining how they're used in quantum computing per se. This is just to start to expose students to the idea that quantum computing exists, and that the things that they are currently learning in their courses actually relate to exciting new areas of science and technology. Also in Algebra 2, depending on the state, many students will learn about matrices and vectors in the context of solving systems of linear equations. And this would be a great opportunity to insert a fast fact. Oh, did you know that matrices and vectors are used in quantum computing? And now students are hearing the term quantum computing in their classes. These are all high school examples, but there's other examples as well. For example, in elementary school, when students learn about probability, that's a great opportunity to mention, oh, do you know that quantum computers use probability? And again, students will be like, what? but they're hearing the term quantum computing. And I think that already is a win, for people to be exposed to the idea that quantum computing exists, that's a term. And that's not something that they need to wait till they're in college to come across. So, I gave just 4 quick examples of how quantum might be inserted in some courses. The great news is that there are people who are working on identifying how to connect quantum to existing curricula. So if you go to q12education.org, which is the website of the National Q12 Education Partnership, and if you go to their resources, you'll find a set of frameworks where they are connecting quantum concepts with currently with high school courses. So they've actually done this already for high school physics and computer science courses, and they are working on high school math and chemistry as well. And so there are people who are working on this of identifying, we already have these courses that exist that have great connections to quantum. How can we point those out better? And so that's a resource that I wanted to draw your attention to. All right, so of course, if you just insert a fast fact, oh, did you know that spin can be used as quantum bits in quantum computing? Well, of course, a student might be like, oh, teacher, what is quantum computing? So to respond to that, I think there's a couple of things you can do. The first thing is you can give your canned response. A quantum computer is a new kind of computer that's based on the laws of quantum physics. It can do certain things faster than normal computers because it follows a different set of rules. So if you want to quote this, memorize it, just use it as your canned response, you're welcome to. And then the other thing you can do, after you give this 2-sentence answer to the student is you can point them to additional resources. So for example, I learned about a resource at last year's IBM Quantum Educator Summit that I tweeted about. You can see the date is August 4th, 2021, because I was so excited. I said, day 2 of the IBM Quantum Educator Summit, I learned about the Quantum Atlas, which has simple explanations of many quantum concepts. The pictures, videos, and other media can also be used under a Creative Commons license. And so this is a great website where you can point students to. So after you give your canned response, say, oh, if you want to learn more, there's actually this great website. Just Google the Quantum Atlas. You'll find it, and it has all these introductory articles with great visuals introducing different ideas about quantum computing and quantum science. So that's a resource. In terms of other resources, if you go again to the Q12 Education Partnership website at q12education.org, they also have under resources a bunch of resources and tools for learning about quantum. And so, if you're a high school teacher and you don't feel super comfortable teaching quantum, it's okay. You just give the canned response. This is what it is at a high level, and let me point you to some resources, students, so that you can continue exploring. So yeah, I just want to encourage you that if you are high school teacher, K through 12 teacher, like it's okay to insert quantum and then to point students to additional resources, and to not, you don't have to be a quantum scientist to introduce quantum in your classroom. All right, so moving on, what are ways that we can introduce quantum if we just have 10 minutes? And when might we have 10 minutes? Well, one area that we might have 10 minutes, we're going to see from this certificate that I dug out of one of my boxes and scanned. So this is actually a certificate I got in elementary school. I blocked out the name of my elementary school and everything. So, young Tommy Wong got this certificate and has shown exceptional ability and achieved outstanding recognition in something. So you might think, oh, I'm now a quantum scientist. Maybe I got this certificate for my performance in math or in science. But no, I got this award because of my outstanding achievement in recess. Apparently, I loved recess and was great at playing. And so one of the worst things, though, was when it was a rainy day and we weren't able to go out to play. So what we would typically do, at least in my part of the US, is we would stay inside and we would play a game as a class. There's typically something called a heads up 7-up. Some of you might be familiar with that. And so this is a classroom game that we could play, 10, 15 minutes during recess time, maybe if it's lunchtime, 30 minutes. And the idea is you don't have a full lesson, a full hour kind of block of time, but you have a shorter amount of time. Maybe instead of playing heads up 7-up, we should be playing a quantum game. And so I want to share with you a game that I created, which could work for this, called Qubit Touchdown. I actually use this with my college students, but I could imagine it being used for a recess activity. So Qubit Touchdown is a quantum computing board game that with an American football theme. You don't need to know American football to play this. I've played this with international researchers who don't know American football at all, and they were able to play this just fine and enjoy it. And so there's a picture of Qubit Touchdown. In terms of where to get this, the first way is to make your own copy. And so if you go to my website at thomaswong.net, I actually have a YouTube video on there where I explain how to make your own copy. So for example, for these game cards that are on the right, you don't actually have to, purchase nice playing cards like this. You could write these cards out on index cards. You can write them on little pieces of cardboard and just shuffle the cardboard. And so in the video, I give all sorts of different ideas for how to make your own set of this game. On my website, there's also some PDFs that you can download and print that are black and white. So you can download the game board, or you can draw the game board on a sheet of paper if you don't have a printer. There's also a PDF of the cards. So if you do have a printer and maybe some card stock, you can print the playing cards front and back as well. So you can make your own copy. That would be probably the cheapest way of getting it. If you want to buy a professionally produced copy, I did upload the game to thegamecrafter.com. The Game Crafter is a print-on-demand board game manufacturer for independent board games. And so the idea is they make it on demand. So if you order one copy, they make that copy and then send it to you. So if you order 10 copies, they make 10 copies and send it to you. And so because of that, it's going to be more expensive because they're not manufacturing it in bulk. And they're also made actually in Madison, Wisconsin, in the United States, which is where the Game Crafter is located. So there are ways. So in terms of getting your own copy of Cuba Touchdown, you can make your own, or you can buy a nice professionally made set. And the picture here is the professionally made set. So you can see it's quite nice quality. So let me explain the game, and hopefully you might have some ideas for how you might introduce this in your class. So it's a 2-player game. So say Alice versus Bob. So the football can be in one of 6 positions, which are the circles shown on the board, where it's a 0, 1, plus, minus, I, and minus I. And Alice and Bob take turns moving the football around these 6 positions by playing their action cards. They're playing cards. And Alice and Bob each have 4 cards in their hand, and after they play a card, then they draw a new one to replenish it. So the idea is that they always have 4 cards until they run out at the end. And Alice is trying to get the football to, say, the plus end zone at the top. So if Alice can get the football up there to the top, then she scores a touchdown, scores a point. And if Bob gets the football down to the minus end zone at the bottom, then that's how Bob scores a touchdown or a point. And the idea is that whoever scores the most touchdowns by the time all 52 action cards are played wins. So whoever scores the most touchdowns wins. All right, let's go through an example of this. So let's say Alice kicks off by rolling a binary die. So in the game, there's a binary die. So it's a 6-sided die. It has 3 zeros and 3 ones on it. So you're equally likely to get 0 and 1. And in my video, when I explain how to make your own copy, I explain you can use a coin and just flip it or something else. Different ways to get a binary die. So Alex kicks off, and she kicks off to 1, which means that the football is going to start at 1. So let's go ahead and draw the football there on the right at position 1. So Alice has kicked off, and so Bob's going to return. So now Bob's going to play a card, just like in American football. So what Bob should do, if he can, is he should play an H card, because that will move the football down to the minus position where Bob will score a touchdown. But unfortunately, Bob doesn't have an H card, so he has to play something else from his hand. So Bob plays the square root of X. And so if you look at the board, there's an arrow from the 1 position to the I position, and it's labeled the square root of X. So the ball just moves from 1 to I. And so the ball moves over there. And now Alice and Bob take turns moving the ball. So Bob just moved it. Now Alice is going to move it. So Alice, she's trying to get the ball to the top of the board. So looking at her cards, she has 4 options. She chooses to play Z. And if you look at the board, from where the ball currently is at I, if Alice plays either X, Z, or H, the ball will move to minus I. And so the ball moves over there. So now, Alice just played. Now Bob's going to play. So Bob, looking at his cards, like, oh man, these cards are terrible. Like, who shuffled? And so Bob, he ends up playing a Y card. So if you look at the board where the ball is at minus I, let's see, well, S moves it up there. The square root of X moves it down. X, Z, and H move it diagonally. Where's Y? So if it's not labeled out of position, it does nothing. So in this case, Y does nothing. So the ball just stays still. As an aside, this is all accurate with quantum computing. So if your state is minus I and you play a Y, you get minus I with a global phase. So you have the minus I state. So everything here is 100% accurate to actual quantum computing because I use this in my classroom for teaching. And I don't want my game to teach something wrong. And then when we do the math, students are confused. So this is all 100% accurate. Okay, Bob just played a card. Now it's Alice's turn. So Alice is trying to get the ball up to her end zone at the plus. So she looks at her card and she goes, yes, I have an S card. So she plays S. The ball moves to plus, and Alice has scored a touchdown. So she scored a point. Touchdown. So Alice scored. What she'll do is she'll kick off again by rolling the binary die, and then play will continue. And then they'll keep on playing, scoring touchdowns until all the cards are used up. And again, whoever scores the most touchdowns by the time all the cards are used up wins. So that's qubit touchdown. And you can see you can play this entire game without any mention of quantum computing, of what these different cards represent, of what these different positions represent. And I did that intentionally because the idea is you have students play this, and afterwards you can drop the catch, which is that you were doing quantum computing. And hopefully students will respond to this by thinking, oh, that wasn't so bad. Like if I can play this game, maybe I can do quantum computing as a career. Maybe I can understand quantum computing. And maybe some students will be inspired after playing this game, going, oh, if I learned this entire game, it's just quantum computing. I can probably do that. And maybe more people will enter the field and will consider it because they were introduced by a game. And the idea is that introducing quantum computing with a game can be much less intimidating than starting with math. I think for some students, if we tried to explain all the movements on this board by jumping straight into the math, many of them might be more intimidated than using this game approach. Another thing is that, playing the game, that could be your 10-minute activity. If you wanted to expand this into a more fuller lesson, or if you had a lunch break instead of just recess, you can also then use this as a springboard to explain some quantum concepts. So on the back of every playing card is this. So for those who are familiar with quantum computing, you'll recognize that that sphere or that ball is called a Bloch sphere. And the north pole of the Bloch sphere is a 0, and the south pole is a 1. And with a bit, those are the only two possible states you can have, a 0 or a 1, the north pole or the south pole. But with a quantum bit or qubit, it can be any point on the Bloch sphere, not just the north pole or the south pole. It could be on the equator, the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, anywhere on this sphere. But qubit touchdown, this game, only uses 6 of all the possible places on a sphere. So it uses 0 and 1, the north and south pole, which is on the z-axis. It uses plus and minus, which is on the x-axis, which is coming out of the card. And it uses I and minus I on the y-axis, which is going side to side. And so, now students are learning a little bit, okay, like that's what these positions represent. And so, when the football is moving around the board, it actually corresponds to a qubit that's moving between these 6 different states. Again, depending on your audience, you may or may not go into all this additional explanation. The game does include a card, though, that explains all this. So it's like the physics of qubit touchdown. So the playing cards that Alex and Bob were using earlier, those correspond to quantum gates. So let's look at one of them. So if you look at the square root of x card, this is what it looks like. And it actually says at the bottom, this rotates about the x-axis by 90 degrees. So the x-axis is coming out of the board. And so if the football's at 0 and we rotate around the x-axis by 90 degrees, then that will rotate 90 degrees to minus I. And if we play the square root of x again, that will rotate from minus I to 1. If we play square root of x again, we'll go from 1 to I. And then again, we'll go from I to 0. And so that explains why on the board, the square root of x had the arrows that it did. And all of the playing cards, have some type of description like this. So once students understand that we're talking about points on the Bloch sphere, they can figure out where all the movements on the board came from. Another aspect of the game that has some real physics is the idea of measurement. So even though a qubit can be any point on this Bloch sphere, if you measure its value to be 0 or 1, then you're only going to get 0 or 1 with some probability. And so if you look at the different states that are used in the game, if you look at plus, minus, I, and minus I, those are all on the equator of this sphere, meaning that they're the same distance from the North Pole and the South Pole. So if you measure a qubit in the state plus, Well, you would get 0 with a 50% chance, and you'd get 1 with a 50% chance. Again, because if you're on the equator, you're equidistant from the North and the South poles. And so, so when you kick off after scoring a touchdown, that actually corresponds to a measurement. Because remember, when you score a touchdown, the football is either in the plus state at the end zone at the top or the minus state, the end zone at the bottom. And if you measure a qubit in the plus state or the minus state, which are both on the equator, you'll get 0 or 1 with a 50-50 chance. And so when you're kicking off, you're actually doing a quantum measurement. You roll the die, and then whatever outcome you get, 0 or 1, that's where the ball ends up. And so there are all these ways that you can go from playing the game to some more details about how it connects to quantum computing. Yeah, so I want to spend a good amount of time on this because I think this is a really concrete resource that many of you might find useful. And again, there are plans to make your own copy, or you can purchase copies as well. All right, so this is great for my students. It also works in other contexts. I actually played this with my parents. And here's a picture of my parents playing it with each other. They are of retirement age, let's say. And so they were able to play it and understand it. Here's another picture from Jonathan Gross, who played his copy of Qubit Touchdown with his grandma. And so the idea is, by making this a game, hopefully it's accessible to a lot more people. All right, moving on. I want to talk about some resources for teaching quantum if you have 1 hour, so like one lesson. Maybe it's 50 minutes, something like that, but about an hour. So say you have a single lesson. What are some resources, or what are some occasions where you might have a single lesson? So one example is if you're a high school teacher, after the AP test, once the AP test is over, you kind of have more flexibility as to what topics you might want to cover. And maybe you want to do a single lesson on quantum computing. That would be a great option. Another option is if you need a plan for a substitute teacher. So when I was a high school teacher, all of the teachers in our school, we had in our desk drawers some folders which had lessons for substitute teachers. So that way, if I woke up one morning and I was sick, I could call my school and be like, "Oh, I'm sick. I need a sub today." They could just go to my classroom, open my drawer, pull out the substitute teacher lesson plan, and they would have something to give the sub to teach that day. And it needed to be something that didn't relate, or that wasn't like an integral part of whatever I was currently teaching. And so, a quantum lesson could be great for that because it's something that could be taught as a single lesson, and it wouldn't, interrupt the flow of whatever unit you were currently in. Another occasion where you might want a single lesson if there's some type of special event. So for example, World Quantum Day, which happens on April 14th, will be a great opportunity. Hey, there's this International World Quantum Day celebration where we celebrate and learn about all things quantum and quantum computing as well. Let's teach a lesson on quantum. So that could be another event. So where to get some single lessons? Again, I'm going to point you to q12education.org, to the National Q12 Education Partnership. And on their page, you can go to Quantime. And on Quantime, they have a bunch of these lessons. You can see, here's a screenshot where they've broken them out into separate ages. So there's one about quantum cupcakes, a little virtual game that teaches some quantum ideas. That's for grades 6 through 8. There's another one that's grades 7 through 12, 9 through 12, and so forth. So these are similar to the hour of code, if you're familiar with that from computer science education. The idea is here's a single lesson. We want to try to get students to do something quantum related, just a single hour. These quantum activities are K through 12 activities, again, at different grade levels. And they're all designed to fit in one class period. And what's important is that they have teacher guides. So there's a lot of great things that people in the community have come up with for teaching, but they're not always packaged in a way that you can just hand them to someone to teach. But these have teacher's guides. So there's that additional information where you could hand it off to someone and they could just teach it without being a quantum scientist themselves. And so, yeah, I just wanted to point out these resources so that you know that they are available. And finally, I want to talk in some detail about how to teach quantum if you have a full semester, because I've created some resources for this as well. So first of all, let's talk about different courses that one might offer in quantum computing by increasing amounts of math. So the least amount of math will be like a Quantum 101 type course for everyone, where the idea is, we need people in business, people in politics, people in all sorts of fields to be aware of quantum and quantum computing, even if they're not working in it from a technical perspective. So the idea here could be that there's actually no math at all in this course, where this would be the course where people need to know why Shor's algorithm for factoring is important, but they don't need to know what Shor's algorithm actually is or how to implement it. So you can think of it as, to raise quantum awareness. This is a course people should take because quantum computing, quantum information science is next generation technology, and we need to equip people to know the implications of future technologies. Another course, which would have some more math, would be a Quantum 101 course for future quantum scientists. So you imagine a freshman who's a math major, a physics major, a computer science major, an engineering major, where they could become quantum scientists. They're interested in majoring in a technical field, of working in a technical career, but they're freshmen. They haven't taken advanced math yet. But we may not want to wait till they're juniors or seniors or grad students to actually teach them the basics of quantum computing. So you can have a Quantum 101, a freshman level class for these technical majors where they're open and perhaps even eager to learn some math, but they haven't learned advanced math yet. The next level would be undergraduates or upper division. So now you have your junior and your senior students. So, students who are these technical majors, now they have more math under their belt. They've taken a linear algebra course. Now you could have a quantum computing course that goes much deeper into the math. And then in increasing amounts of math, again, you could have, say, a graduate level course in quantum computing. So in particular, I'm going to be talking about another note is that you might have heard of many summer schools. IBM has a summer school, where a lot of these summer schools are actually full courses, but are just squeezed into a shorter amount of time. So for example, you might see a camp where it's like a 1-week camp all day, for 5 days, diving deep into quantum. I mean, if you're spending all day, if you have lectures all day, that's basically equivalent to a whole semester just spaced out. So a lot of summer schools you can think of as being these types of courses, just on a compressed timeline. All right, so I'm going to be focusing on Quantum 101 for future quantum scientists. So this is a course I've been teaching at Creighton University since 2018. And again, the only prerequisite for this course is trigonometry, because I'm expecting freshmen, are able to take this course. But I am going to be teaching math. Because these are the students that are potentially going to be working in quantum computing on the technical side of things, and will be majoring in technical majors. I was also planning on teaching this Quantum 101 course for everyone, and I have it in the books. It's a registered course at Creighton. I was going to teach it last fall, but I was asked to serve in the National Quantum Coordination Office, and so I put those plans on hold, and the plan is I'll teach that when I get back. So maybe, in a year or two, I'll have some more things I could say about that level, of course. But in today's keynote, I'm just going to talk about the one above that, which is the Quantum 101 for future quantum scientists. So the big thing I want you to understand is I actually turned my course into a textbook that came out this past January. And it's a free book. So if you go to my website, thomaswong.net, there's a free PDF of this textbook. It's like 400 pages, It has over 250 exercises. It has answers to all the problems in the back of the book. So this is like a full textbook that's free that you can use. That is literally my course. So all the problems in the textbook, those are the homework problems I wrote for my book and for my class. And also, my original plan was just to make it a free PDF, and I update it regularly as typos are found. And every time I teach the course, I'm sure I'll have some updates as well. But there's a lot of interest in, this is a 400-page book. It'd be nice to have a paper copy to read. And so I actually also uploaded it to Amazon, where you can buy fairly affordably paperback and hardcover prints. And so anytime I update the PDF, I also update it on Amazon, because Amazon actually has a book printing service. So the idea is when you order it, Amazon will print it, bind it, and ship it to you. So it's actually print on demand, which allows me to easily update the book as well. So in terms of some history, so actually when I first taught my class in 2018, I recognized that there was a need where this would be a really useful class at a lot of different universities and maybe even high schools. And so when I wrote up my lecture notes, I typed them all up in a textbook format. When I wrote all the homework problems, I typed them up in a textbook format. So basically, like, I wrote out all my notes and everything as a textbook from the start. And then every time I would teach the class, I would update it. Or even a lot of times, even after teaching it, like that day, I'd be like, I didn't like how that lesson went. I would have done, in retrospect, I would want to change things. So then I changed things. And so this book is the product of, many iterations of teaching. And again, trig is the only prerequisite. So, advanced high school students could also use this textbook. And again, this is the one for technical students. So I do teach some basic linear algebra, but as we'll get into the details, you'll see that I hold off on it very intentionally until later in the book. So one thing you might have seen in the textbook is that it's not Introduction to Quantum Computing, it's Introduction to Classical and Quantum Computing. And that's because of an observation that many of us in the field have had now, which is that we really need to start with classical. So Olivia, again, from IBM Quantum, asked on Twitter, what is one thing about quantum computing that you don't understand and wish to learn? And someone responded, I don't think 95% of people could explain how regular computers actually work. So why don't you start from the beginning? And so in my course, it's an introduction to both classical and quantum computing, because even for our physics majors and even our master's students in physics, a lot of them know how to program, but don't know how classical computers actually work. And so I actually spend about a third of the class on classical computing, which is quite a bit of time. And then the remaining 2/3 on quantum computing. I mentioned that even our master's students at Creighton, we don't have PhD students in physics, that they're able to program, but they're not able to explain how computers actually work. And that's because of a concept in computing called layers of abstraction. So the idea is you have things that build on top of each other. So at the bottom, you have your actual physical devices, the transistors. Above that, you have logic gates. And as you build up, you have these well-polished tasks that computers can do, including smartphones can do. And so a lot of our students at Creighton are very good at the top level. They're great at using computers to get things done. A lot of them have learned basic programming, some Python, some Mathematica from some of their courses. But they don't really know the bottom layers. But that's where quantum computing currently is. There's a lot of efforts to try to move things up so more people can use quantum computers without needing to know the details, but we're just not there yet. And so if you really want to know quantum computing at this stage, you need to know those bottom layers of abstraction. And so we really need to start with how classical computers work at those lower levels. And so my course starts off with Unit 1 being all classical stuff, and then the remaining units, and these correspond to the chapters in the book. So Chapter 1, classical, chapters 2 through 7 on quantum. You'll see how these topics break down and how the classical topics actually mirror very well the quantum topics. And so I think the time spent on classical computing it's not like a third of the class is like wasted. A lot of the quantum stuff is faster because students have the classical background. So I think it does make up for some of its own time. So in classical, for example, I'll start off by talking about bits. Like I'll talk to students, remind them, like, do you remember binary numbers? Probably not. You might have learned it in like 4th grade. Now you're in college. It's been a while. Let's talk about binary numbers. Let's talk about how bits can be used in code information, such as using ASCII. And then later on, we'll learn about quantum bits, once we get to the quantum chapters. Classical computing, we'll talk about logic gates. And later on, when we get to it, we'll talk about quantum gates. We'll talk about circuit diagrams classically, and later on, we'll have quantum circuits. Universal gates classically, like the NAND gate is universal. And then in quantum computing, there's universal gate sets. So the idea is when students understand classically, there's this concept of universal gates. When we talk about universal gate sets in quantum computing, they're not having to learn that concept because they already know it. So again, it does end up making up for some of the time. We talk about how to add numbers on a classical computer, because that's actually a really basic thing where students are like, how does a computer using bits add 2 numbers? So we talk about that classically, and we also cover that quantumly. And it's a good algorithm to learn before you get into all like the deeper quantum algorithms. In classical computing, we learn Verilog programming, which is a hardware description language. And that's really nice because when students later learn OpenChasm, it's very, very similar. And now when students learn OpenChasm in quantum, it's not like an arbitrary thing that quantum scientists just invented. It's actually rooted in decades of classical computing. So I like this because it shows that quantum computing didn't emerge out of in some bubble, but it actually emerged out of decades of research into computer science and quantum physics. We learned Boolean algebra, which is the math of classical computing. And so later when I introduced linear algebra as a math of quantum computing, it's like, oh, okay, there's an algebra for quantum computing. Makes sense, just like there's an algebra for classical computing. Reversible gates and unitary gates. Error correction with a repetition code, which is very similar to the Shor code in quantum error correction. Some other topics we talk about are computational complexity, Turing machines, and the Church-Turing thesis. And then that introduces why quantum computers are interesting, because they might break the extended Church-Turing thesis. We also have a whole chapter on quantum programming, on entanglement and quantum protocols, and on quantum algorithms. And I crossed out Shor because it's always been my goal to make it to Shor's algorithm. I've never had the time to make it in one semester, but the textbook does go all the way to Shor. So the first midterm is classical computing. There's a second midterm in Unit 4, and then the final exam. Another thing is throughout the course, we also use Sage Math and or Mathematica to do simple computations. The textbook includes code for both because Sage Math is free and open source, and Mathematica, even though it's really common in physics, is something that must be purchased. Excuse me. So I spend a lot of time on classical computing, and one of the pains is, man, I'm not able to make it to Shor's algorithm. So one of the things I actually ask my students on their course evaluations is, should we keep the classical computing or should we cut out some of it and do more quantum? And universally, 100% of my students have said to keep classical. So for example, one student said, I would personally keep it as is. I did not have much background in classical computing, so I really enjoyed learning about it. Also, going over the classical ideas before the quantum ones gave an understandable basis to which the quantum ideas could be related. The classical part was well worth the time it took. And another quote that's very similar. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip through a lot of this, but in quantum computing, all of chapter 2 is about 1 qubit. We start with Qubit Touchdown, the board game, and we do a bunch of stuff with 1 qubit using no linear algebra whatsoever. So they understand quantum states as points on the block sphere. They understand measurement and measurement in different bases. An example of another basis. They understand quantum gates as rotations and as linear maps. So for example, you can understand how the Hadamard gate acts on this as a rotation on the block sphere and figure out that the state would move up there. You can work out the math of what happens without any matrices or vectors, so without linear algebra. And so we actually spend the entire chapter, including some basic quantum circuits, the entire chapter doing everything without linear algebra. And it's only until the next chapter, chapter 3, that we introduce linear algebra now with 1 qubit. And so the idea is students understand all these quantum concepts without being bogged down with learning new math. And now when they learn new math in this chapter, they understand, oh, this thing, linear algebra, it's a tool and it makes things easier. Like, this is great. And now when they learn linear algebra, there's context for it. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but that's another big message for how I've taught it, is to delay linear algebra. I've seen some quantum computing textbooks where it says linear algebra is not a prerequisite, but if you look at the book, the first chapter is a primer on linear algebra, which basically means you need linear algebra to understand all the rest of the textbook. So basically, linear algebra is a prerequisite. So I wanted my textbook to not be like that. Then we get to multiple qubits. We play IBM's quantum board game, Entanglement. We have a midterm there. We have a whole unit on quantum programming. We use IBM Quantum Experience. They use OpenQASM and Qiskit, which is made by IBM. And this is all in the textbook. Again, limited time. It's on the textbook. And then we jump into quantum protocols and algorithms. And one of the great things about this is that we use quantum simulators and IBM Quantum throughout all of these now, because we just had a chapter on quantum programming. And so now when I give a homework problem, I can say, hey, click on this link. It'll take you to IBM Quantum, where there's an oracle that I've given you. Implement Grover's algorithm using that. And so that's a nice resource that is provided. And so I've talked now about different ways that you can introduce quantum in the classroom. If you have 10 seconds, 10 minutes during recess, a whole lesson that takes an hour, or a whole semester. And I want to thank you for joining me. And again, there's a lot more details in the textbook. Thank you.
Tom, wonderful presentation. We loved it. Absolutely loved it. Actually, if you don't mind bringing Tom right back on screen, I want to say I wasn't lying. I got the book right here. It's great. I think that everything you were just talking about is exactly what this event is all about, right? We have educators from many different backgrounds coming here looking to bring something from this event back to their course or their classroom. And so, like you said, whether it's 10 seconds or 10 minutes or an hour or the semester, right? This event is all about giving folks something to just grab and say, okay, I want to use this. And I also want to add that recess was also my forte back in school. So I'm on board with that. But if you don't mind, Tom, we have a few extra minutes here to answer a couple questions. I think we probably have time for 2 or 3 questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So one question that came up, someone asked, I have introduced quantum concepts using polarizing filters with demos. Have you tried that? And if so, do you have any examples or exercises that you have used?
Yeah, so in my course, we do have a short part where we talk about what qubits could physically be, and polarization with photons is an example, or spin is another example. Energy levels of an atom or artificial atoms are other examples. But I don't talk in very much detail about physically what quantum bits might be. So I actually don't really do experiments like that. It's more the block sphere representation and understanding qubits and then working from there. So that's not something that I've used as much. But I think it's a very tangible and great way to introduce physically what a qubit could be.
Awesome. Another question here, very much relating to what you were just talking about at the end of your talk there, saying, you know, I'm just not confident that a student could actually get all this material in just one semester. You know, is there any evidence that it does work like that, or that a longer sequence of courses works? And I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like you absolutely have seen that same thing, talking about the prerequisites and talking about the feedback from your students. I'd love to hear more from you on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you are able to teach a sequence of courses, you can go in a lot more depth and students can learn more because they're spending more time on it. But I think that in one semester with what I've covered, that students are able to get it. And I think part of it is because I've resisted the temptation to make it all the way to Shor's algorithm. Like I would love to, and the textbook makes it all the way there, but I've always opted to go slower where all the students are able to follow versus trying to make some arbitrary goal and then losing students along the way. So I think as long as, we, take it, as long as we teach things at a reasonable pace, then students should be able to follow.
Yeah, for sure. And then last question here, this is actually just for me. I want to know, for everyone here that is hoping to start a program, whether they are looking to build something up at the university level, or if they just want to do like, a 1-week unit in their course. What's the best advice you would give more on like the back end of getting things set up and logistically ready to actually go through that unit successfully? Maybe just one big piece of advice for folks to take away.
In terms of the back end, I think one of the nice things is that we have so many different quantum courses that exist now and so many resources and different approaches to teaching it. I think for my particular course, it is taught more as a computer science course. And so the resources you need are very minimal. You're not doing all these lab demos and experiments in the lab component. And so one of the nice things is there's not a bunch of back-end stuff you need to do. You just need basically approval from your department to teach it, which you could do as a special topics course. So then you don't even have to worry about getting it on the books as an official course. Whereas if you were teaching one more closely tied with experiment, there is going to be a lot more back-end work and resources that you would need. So I think maybe one approach is just to start small. Like you may eventually want to teach a course that includes a lab component. But maybe the first time you teach it, just teach a more kind of theory, computer sciencey course like I teach, build some momentum, get more comfortable with it, build buy-in from the university or your school, and then branch out. And it's also great because if you need to apply for a grant to get experimental resources, being able to say, I've taught a course, a couple of times already, we want to expand it, it adds credibility to your grant application.
I like that. So you almost Trojan horse your way into it all. You kind of say, well, I've actually been doing it a few times.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Dr. Tom Wong, thank you so much. Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So everyone, this is just the beginning of the entire day here at the IBM Quantum Educator Summit. We are very excited to have you with us throughout the entire day. Like I mentioned before, all the sessions will be recorded. So if you do need to step away, you can always come back and rewatch it whenever. And the next session actually is the only session throughout the entire day that will not be live. So the next session that you're about to see is a pre-recording that was made by the IBM team about our new classroom tools and platforms. Even though it's a video recording, we will have members of the IBM team in that chat answering questions live as you type them. So please treat it just like a live session in that sense, where you can type your questions and answer them right away. The link for the next session will be showing up in the chat here on screen. I believe it's already there, actually, the link to the next session. So we will see you there, and we'll continue to see you throughout the rest of the day. Thanks so much. Have a great one, everyone.